Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking you back to South Carolina in the summer of '85 for a pretty chilling true crime case. You sent us an audio episode all about the abductions and murders of Sherry Smith and Deborah May Helmick, and man, it's a story that really sticks with you.
What makes this case so fascinating is how it kind of captures this turning point in criminal investigation. We're talking the 80s, when profiling was still a pretty new thing and forensic technology was making some huge strides. We're going to see how investigators used every tool they had to try and stop a killer who was terrorizing multiple communities.
Right from the start, the episode focuses on the Helmick family, a seemingly normal family who had just moved to this place called the Shiloh Mobile Home Park, hoping for a fresh start. Really makes you think how these tragedies can happen anywhere, to anyone.
Yeah, for sure. The episode sets the scene really well. You meet Deborah, she's a waitress. Her husband, Sherwood, he's a construction worker. And they had 3 young kids. They were just trying to build a life, completely oblivious to the danger lurking so close by.
And then, June 14th, 1985, 9-year-old Deborah May is taken from her front yard in broad daylight. Her little brother, Woody, sees the whole thing, hiding under a bush, terrified. Just breaks your heart.
What's so disturbing is this happens just 2 months after they found Sherry Smith's body. Investigators were still trying to figure that case out, and bam, another abduction. And not just any abduction, one with these eerie similarities to the unsolved Smith case. Both girls taken during the day, both blonde hair and blue eyes, and both abductions happen on the same date, 2 years apart down to the hour.
Whoa, that's seriously creepy. Makes you wonder, copycat, or even scarier, the same guy doing it again.
Exactly. That must have been the question going through those investigators' minds. They're dealing with a potential serial predator, and the pressure must have been immense.
Then it gets even darker. The killer starts making calls, just like in the Smith case, taunting the family, even telling them where to find Deborah May's body, like some twisted game.
That was a huge turning point. It basically confirmed for investigators that they were dealing with the same guy. This wasn't just some copycat. It was the same MO, the same chilling pattern.
The episode really captures that fear and confusion that took over the community. Everyone's suspicious of their neighbors. Every stranger is a potential suspect. It must have been incredibly tough for investigators to sort through all that and focus on the facts.
Oh, absolutely. And they're racing against time, desperate for anything that could help them crack the case. Then a breakthrough, and it comes from a totally unexpected source. Sherry Smith's last will and testament.
Wait, her will? How could that be a clue?
Well, the investigators decided to examine it using this pretty new technology at the time. It was called an ESDA machine. Basically, it can detect writing that's been indented on paper, even if it's been written over.
So they were hoping to find something Sherry wrote, but then erased. That's some serious CSI stuff. Was that tech even common back then?
It was cutting edge, yeah, but not widely used. It was a gamble, but it paid off big time. They found part of a phone number indented on the paper, probably from something Sherry had written on a notepad resting on top of the will.
That's insane. A hidden message from beyond the grave, almost. But they didn't have the whole number, right?
Nope, only 9 digits out of 10. Can you imagine the frustration? So close.
So how'd they find that last digit?
Full-on detective mode. They went through every possible combination for the missing digit, checking each one against phone records to see if there was any link to where Sherry lived. It was a grind, but their persistence paid off. They got a hit.
Talk about finding a needle in a haystack. This is where it really starts to get interesting, right?
It does. The number led them to the parents of this young guy stationed at an army base, immediately ruled him out, but then they mentioned their house sitter, a seemingly average dude named Larry Gene Bell.
Hold on. So they knew each other before all this. How did investigators react to that?
They must have been floored. All these random details suddenly start lining up, pointing towards Bell as a possible suspect. Remember how the episode talked about those seemingly insignificant details being crucial? This was it.
This is wild. So who was this Larry Gene Bell?
Well, that's where things take a darker turn. The episode paints a picture of Bell as a troubled guy with a dark past. Prior convictions for assault and attempted abduction, a failed marriage, and a history of disturbing behavior. He even told a psychiatrist once that he had these urges to attack women and needed help before he hurt someone. Chilling to think that warning sign went unheeded.
Makes you wonder how he stayed under the radar for so long. Challenges the idea that all criminals have this obvious dark side. The episode mentioned that some people found him quiet, reserved, even helpful at times. That duality is really scary.
It really is. Bell's case is a stark reminder that appearances can be deceiving. Evil can hide beneath a normal exterior. The investigation was about to expose the truth behind Belle's facade.
Okay, let's get into that. What happened next?
So the next part of the story takes us to the house where Belle was house sitting, the Shepherd's place. Investigators got a search warrant, and what they found, well, it was damning. Blonde hairs that matched Sherry Smith, bloodstains on a mattress, and get this, a Hustler magazine.
Whoa, that's some seriously disturbing stuff, especially that magazine. Points to a potential sexual motive, right? Adds a whole other level of darkness to this whole thing.
Yeah, it does. But even with all that evidence, even face to face with Sherry's mother and sister, Belle insisted he was innocent, claimed that some bad Larry Gene Bell was responsible, tried to separate himself from it all.
Man, that's chilling.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder about the psychology of it all. Was he delusional, or was that just a calculated move to manipulate everyone?
It's a question that's baffled experts for years. With Bell, it seemed like maybe both. He was definitely good at manipulating people, but there were also clear signs of mental instability. The episode talks about that too, how Bell's behavior could be so unpredictable.
The episode also gets into Bell's trials. Sounds like they were pretty wild, with Bell causing disruptions and acting erratically.
Oh yeah, his behavior in court was this strange mix of defiance and attention-seeking. Interrupting, making weird statements, refusing to answer questions. He'd often say, "Silence is golden." It was like he was putting on a show, playing to the media.
It's like he saw the courtroom as his own stage, and the trial as his twisted performance. Hard to believe someone could do those horrific things and then act so brazenly in front of everyone.
And despite his attempts to derail things and act mentally unfit, the evidence against him was overwhelming. Blonde hairs in his room, the bloodstains matching Sherry Smith, his actions after the abductions, calling the Smith family, leading them to Deborah May's body.
It's really disturbing. So what happened with the trials?
Well, Bell was found guilty in both cases, Sherry Smith and Deborah May Helmick, and sentenced to death. But even with those convictions, there were still so many unanswered questions.
Yeah, the episode dives into that, right? Like that tip they got from a teenager who said Bell had shown him 2 dead bodies in an abandoned well back in '84. Totally sends chills down your spine. Did they ever look into that?
They did. The episode mentions investigators took that tip seriously. The timeline matched up with when Sandy Cornett disappeared. She was a young woman who vanished from her home in Charlotte back in 1984. They started this massive search based on what the teenager remembered about where the well was.
So they were looking for Sandy's body. What was Bell's connection to her?
That's where it gets kind of murky. Bell brought up Sandy's name while he was being transferred between prisons, claimed that God would reveal where her body was and that her hands would be folded in prayer, just like Sherry Smith's. It was a creepy detail and so specific.
That's eerie. What about the well? Did they ever find anything?
Sadly, no. They identified a bunch of wells in the area where the teenager described, but nothing turned up. Just another unanswered question hanging over the case. Makes you wonder how many other victims there might have been.
It's a haunting thought. Did they find any other links between Bell and Sandy Cornett?
Yeah, actually. Turns out Bell had lived only 4 miles from Sandy when she disappeared. They'd even met briefly years before through someone they both knew.
Wow, that's a lot of coincidences. Any hard evidence connecting Bell to her disappearance?
Nothing concrete, no. Despite what Bell said and them living close by, no physical evidence was ever found. But he did know specific things about ATM withdrawals that were never made public. Adds another layer to the mystery.
That's unsettling. I think he was just messing with investigators, trying to stay in the spotlight.
It's definitely possible. The episode talks about Bell's attention-seeking behavior. Remember, this is the same guy who proposed to Sherry's sister, Dawn Smith, right there in court during his trial. He was a master manipulator who seemed to thrive on the attention.
And the episode mentions Sandy Cornett wasn't the only other potential victim, right?
Right. Bell also hinted at knowing about 2 other unsolved cases involving young women in Charlotte around that time. Denise Porch, who disappeared in '75, and Beth Marie Hagen, whose body was found in 1980.
It's heartbreaking to think there might be families out there still searching for answers about what happened to their loved ones.
It really is. And to make things even more unsettling, Denise and Beth Marie were also blondes, fitting Bell's apparent victim profile. Makes you wonder if he was responsible for even more that we may never know about.
So even with the convictions for Sherry and Deborah May's murders, there was still this feeling of unease, like justice hadn't been fully served.
Yeah, and that feeling was just amplified by Bell's behavior on death row. The episode talks about how he became increasingly erratic, claiming to be Jesus, bathing in his own urine, even talking to a bird he thought God had sent him.
His behavior sounds like something straight out of a movie. Was he really losing it, or was this another act, another way to manipulate the system?
Tough to say for sure. But his behavior definitely raised questions about whether he was mentally fit to be executed. Some were concerned that his mental state had deteriorated so much that it would be wrong to go through with the death penalty.
Yeah, that's a really tough ethical and legal situation. On the one hand, you have these awful crimes and the need for justice, but on the other, is it right to execute someone who might not fully grasp what's happening?
Absolutely. It's a debate that continues to this day. In Bell's case, a judge decided he was competent enough to be executed, and he was put to death in 1996. He chose the electric chair over lethal injection.
It's a somber end to a truly horrific chapter. Even with Bell gone, the impact of what he did continues to affect people. What happened to the families of his victims after all this?
That's where the episode shifts its focus to the lasting effects of Bell's actions on the families of Sherry Smith and Deborah May Helmick. It reminds us that beyond the headlines and trials, there are real people whose lives are forever changed by these crimes.
It's a perspective that's easy to forget when you're focused on the details of the case. What happened to the families? How did they deal with such unimaginable loss?
The episode highlights how each family navigated their grief in different ways. For the Smith family, there was a sense of closure from Sherry's final letter.
Oh, you mean the one she wrote before she was abducted, where she forgives her killer and talks about her faith? That letter was incredible.
It really was such a powerful message of hope and forgiveness in the face of such evil. Sherry's father, Bob, continued his work as a chaplain. He found comfort in helping other families going through similar tragedies. And her sister, Dawn, became an advocate for faith and resilience. She even won Miss South Carolina and shared her story on national TV.
It's amazing how they were able to turn their pain into something positive. How about the Helmick family? How did they cope?
Their journey was much harder. They faced huge financial struggles, their marriage fell apart under the weight of their grief, and young Woody, who saw his sister taken, continued to struggle with the trauma. But they found strength in their community. The support from their neighbors helped them get through those tough years.
It reminds you that even in the darkest times, there can be glimmers of hope. The kindness of a community can make a huge difference when people are dealing with such unimaginable grief.
Definitely. And while the episode doesn't shy away from the pain and suffering caused by Bell's actions, it also emphasizes the strength of the human spirit. Both families found ways to honor their loved ones and move forward, even after such a terrible tragedy.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope can endure. What stands out to you the most from this deep dive into the Larry Jean Bell case?
For me, it's the chilling realization that evil can hide in plain sight. Bell, from what we know, was a pretty average guy. He didn't outwardly seem like a monster. But beneath the surface, there was this darkness that led him to commit some of the most horrific acts imaginable.
It really makes you question how well you can ever truly know another person. And it highlights how important it is to be vigilant, to trust your gut when something feels wrong, even if you can't quite put your finger on it.
Yeah, it's a sobering reminder that we can't just assume everything's okay. We got to look out for each other, especially those who are more vulnerable.
Absolutely. We can't erase the pain from tragedies like this, but we can learn from them, work to improve things and advocate for better support for victims and their families.
The episode wraps up with this powerful quote from Sherry Smith's last letter, the one she wrote before her abduction.
You mean the part where she says, "Some good will come from this"? Pretty remarkable statement, especially given everything that happened.
It really is. Makes you think, even in the darkest moments, there can be hope, that something positive can come out of tragedy. What do you think she meant by that? I think it speaks to the just the incredible resilience of the human spirit, that ability to find meaning and purpose, even when facing unimaginable pain. It says a lot about Sherry that she could find it in her to forgive and believe something good could come from such a horrific experience.
It's inspiring, but it also brings up some tough questions. How do we balance the need for justice with the complexities of mental illness? How can communities heal after something like this? What can we learn from cases like this to better protect people and prevent it from happening again?
Those are questions we're always grappling with as a society. No easy answers, but I think it starts with recognizing just how complicated these issues are. We need to have honest discussions about mental health, about the warning signs of violence, and how we can create a more supportive and watchful environment for our communities.
It's about creating a culture of empathy and awareness, where we're not afraid to speak up when something feels wrong, and where we're willing to offer help to those who need it.
Exactly. And it's about remembering that behind all the headlines, the court cases, the statistics, there are real people whose lives are forever changed by these events. We owe it to them to learn from what happened and work towards a safer, more compassionate future.
It's a heavy thought, but important to remember. Before we finish up, one last question for you. It's something the episode leaves us thinking about. With all the advancements in DNA technology and profiling we have now, could someone like Larry Gene Bell get away with what he did for so long today?
That's a great question, and honestly, I don't think there's a clear-cut answer. On the one hand, technology has come a long way. We have DNA databases, sophisticated surveillance, and profiling methods that were unthinkable back then. But on the other hand, criminals are getting smarter too, finding new ways to exploit weaknesses and stay ahead of the law.
It's a constant back and forth, and technology alone can't keep us safe. It's about using those advancements with human intelligence, being vigilant, and working together to build a safer world.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Technology is a powerful tool, but it's only as good as the people using it. We all have a part to play in staying informed, staying engaged, and working together to create communities that are resilient, supportive, and most importantly, safe.
Well said. This has been a really insightful deep dive into a complicated and disturbing case. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us and helping us unpack this story.
My pleasure. I think it's always valuable to revisit these cases, to learn from the past, and think about how we can use that knowledge to create a better future.
One last thought for everyone listening as we wrap up this deep dive. The Larry Gene Bell case shows us that evil can hide in plain sight. It's our responsibility to be aware, to trust our instincts, and to never stop fighting for a world where justice is served and the memory of those we've lost to violence is honored.
Beautifully put. And remember, knowledge is power. The more we understand about crime and the forces behind it, the better we can protect ourselves and our loved ones.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.